What is up, my Shadowverse soldiers, and welcome back to another Shadowverse Evolved video. Alright soldiers, in today's video of Inverse Academy, we're going to be going over a Dragoncraft build, and if you haven't already known from the title, we're going to be talking about Draconic Duelist. So this deck is very good. I think it's very solid. I think it's a very good matchup against vampires, and I think if you tech for it correctly, I think it actually can beat Earthright, but it's just a hot take. But before we get into it, I have some things to talk about. Alright soldiers, it is that time again where we have World Finals right around the corner. It is this week. I know I've been a little bit lacking on information, but at the same time it feels like the website hasn't been super accurate for everybody in the US. So if you want information about how Finals is going to go, stay tuned till the end of the video. I'll be going over World's Finals and everything like that. But getting back into the video, we're going to be talking about Draconic Duelists, so I do think that this is a very staple deck. It's a deck that's supposed to be coming out in set 10, just like Academics is, but it is now in set 9. So I do believe the decks that are supposed to be in set 10, being played in set 9, and now we're in like a set 9 meta where these two decks are here. Decks like these can probably flourish a little bit better than they did in the Japanese meta. Alright, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the pros and the cons of the deck. So for the pros, we have removal, storm, cheap followers, and buffs, and on the other hand, we have cons with Remelia base to draw, ramp, and setup. Alright, so starting off with the first pro, so we have removal. So this deck has a lot of removal. So the followers that you do play sometimes have ward. The followers you do play sometimes have bane. The spell cards in your deck definitely can do some good removing while also filtering your hand. And there's lots of other ways to do things, and there's hard removal in the deck too, so you're not lacking in anywheres there. And then next up we have Storm, so there are Storm followers in the deck. We all know that Forte is still the golden card for Dragoncraft, so Storm is accessible in this deck. And then we have cheap followers, so we're going to be playing a whole bunch of followers in our deck, and they're going to be pretty cheap. Since we are playing Dragon and we're ramping, this is going to be pretty nice for our board, but it's not going to be very nice for our hand. Alright, and then we have buffs, so if your follower manages to stick around for one turn, you can buff it to be a bigger stat line, which is pretty scary in some situations. Alright, and then moving over into cons, we have Remelia base. So, the only way you can start your engine is through one card, and you only have 3 of it in your 40 card deck, and there's no way to search for it. So, it's very hard sometimes to go ahead and get the engine running since you need the one card to get it started, so you're really going to have to hard draw for this card. And then we have draw, so the deck doesn't really draw too much, but that's usually how Dragoncraft really goes. You give up your hand size for extra play points, and so on and so forth. Alright, and the next thing is ramp. So we are a Dragoncraft deck where ramp is definitely exclusive to us, but it's very weird that there's only 3 sources of ramp in this deck, so we're going to have to look through other sets and other sources to be able to get the ramp in our deck that we need to actually see the consistency. Alright, and last con we have is setup. So this is one of the decks where you're not going to have low bodies, you're going to be playing low to the ground. No, you're going to be setting up a big line of plays where when you go for your turn, if you're on turn 6, there's going to be a lot of things that you're doing. And if it's not towards killing your opponent, you're definitely going to be setting up your board to where your opponent has to either answer it or they're going to be taking a lot of damage next turn. Alright, so let's talk about our Legendaries. So we have Remelia Lightning Striker. So looking at Remelia Lightning Striker, she's a 3-cost 1/3. She evolves for 1 and she has Bane, and then she has a Last Words ability, so when she dies, if there's an Aftershock on your field, place a lightning counter on each Aftershock on your field, and if not, summon one. While looking over at the evolve, so she turns into a 2/4 with Assail and Bane, but on evolve you select an enemy following the field, and if there's an amulet on your field, you deal 3 damage, and then she still has the Last Words effect. Alright, and then we have Aftershock, so it's a 3-cost amulet token. Whenever a Draconic Duelist follower is put onto your field, place a lightning counter on this card. You can engage this and select a Dragoncraft follower on your field and give a +2 attack. You can activate only if there are at least 5 lightning counters on this card, and then it has a second activate ability to select an enemy follower on the field, destroy it, and then deal 3 damage to its leader. You can activate only if you have at least 10 lightning counters on this card. Alright, so like we said in the cons, the only way you're going to be getting an Aftershock token is through Remelia, and if you don't have Remelia in your opening hand, and you don't see Remelia by turn 3, if not turn 4, you're in some deep trouble. But this card really does help, especially if you manage to put an amulet on board turn 1 and then you play Remelia turn 3, you're able to remove something, leave Remelia up, and then if your opponent plays anything bigger than 4 defense or 4 attack, you can swing Remelia into it and get your engine started. Alright, so let's talk about the Draconic Duelist in the deck. Alright, so here are the low-cost bodies in the deck that are really going to be helping you generate lightning counters, especially this first card, Hypersonic Dragon Nude. Alright, so starting off with her, she is a 1-cost 2-win. While there's another Draconic Duelist card on your field, this follower has Rush and Assail. When she comes into play, you can spend 1 play point, and if Overflow is active for you, search your deck for a Hypersonic Dragonute, summon it, and then shuffle your deck. Alright, so in my time of playtesting, this card has just been very solid, especially on turn 1, and if you need to match your opponent's Freak and playing low to the ground. Alright, next up we have Katakura Kujiro, so she's a 2-cost 2/2. You can evolve her 1, and when she comes into play, select another Draconic Duelist follower on your field, and if Overflow is active for you, give a +1/+1. Now this effect does come up sometimes, especially when you are swinging for storm damage, because there's going to be lots of storm in this deck. And next up we have Dragoon Scyther, so she's a 2-cost 2/2. She has Bane, and while there's another Draconic Duelist card on your field, this follower has Storm. So one of the cards that's the pros here, it is also a Storm follower with Bane, so this is very good to either swing in for face, or to just go ahead and remove something off the field. Alright, and then lastly we have Masamune Raging Dragon, so he's a 2-cost 2/2, he has Bane, and when he comes into play, if there are at least 3 Draconic Duelist cards on your field, give this follower +2/+2 and Storm. Alright, so that skill right there is what we're going to be paying attention to or seeing a lot in this deck. So we're going to need at least 3 Draconic Duelist cards on our field to get the most out of what we want in our plays. And just for example, we can easily play 3 Draconic Duelist cards as long as we have the Aftershock, as long as we play a card like either Hypersonic Dragonute or Dragon Scyther and many of the other cards that we're going to be seeing throughout this video. Alright, so let's talk searchers and searches. Alright, so we have the Katakura Evolve, so she turns into a 3/3, and on Evolve you look at the top 4 cards of your deck. You may reveal a Draconic Duelist follower from among them and add it to your hand. Put the rest of the bottom of your deck in any order. Yeah, so there's not a big way to search for followers, or at least add things to your hand in this deck in many ways. So Katakura Evolved is something that you're definitely going to need. And then next up we have Roy Dragon Cleaver, so he's a 3-cost 2/2, you can evolve him for 1 boom. When he comes into play, search your deck for a 2-cost Dragoncraft spell, reveal it and add it to your hand. Alright, so this card is absolutely legendary to search out your Dragon Oracle for not just Draconic Duelist, but for any Dragoncraft deck if you're having a problem. So being able to search for your Dragon Oracle is important, especially if you don't hit it on turn 2, because that's when you really want to curve out, is on turn 2. Alrighty, next up we have Pure Voice Dragoon, so he's a 5-cost 3/4. When he comes into play, search your deck for a Draconic Duelist follower that costs 4 or less, you summon it, then shuffle your deck, and if Overflow is active for you, give your leader +3 defense. So like I was saying before, being in Overflow is very important, so you really want to see your ramp in this deck. So being able to ramp and being in Overflow is very good, because in those early turns where you do ramp, your opponent might be playing those low body followers and then swinging at you, so getting that health back is very important. But with Pure Voice Dragoon's regular ability outside of Overflow, being able to get another Draconic Duelist follower really does help, because you do not only get the lightning counter from playing Pure Voice Dragoon, you're going to get another one from that other Draconic Duelist that you're going to be playing, and then you're going to be getting the fanfare for whatever Draconic Duelist you're going to be choosing. Alright, and then lastly we have Poseidon, so he's an 8-cost 4/7, he has Ward, but when he comes into play, search your deck for up to 2 Draconic Duelist followers with different names that cost 2 or less, summon them, and then shuffle your deck. Alright, my philosophy is always deck thinning is deck winning, and if you manage to get all the way to 8 play points and have Poseidon on the field, you're not only going to get a lightning counter from him, you're going to get 2 other lightning counters from the other 2 Draconic Duelists you're going to be playing. They're going to get their fanfare effects, or they're going to be doing their abilities, whatever you're going to be choosing, and then you're going to get those 2 extra lightning counters there. Alright, so let's talk removal. So we did already see the followers that had Bane, but let's talk about our followers that have abilities in terms of removing stuff and in spells. So the first card we're going to be looking at is Force of the Dragonute. It's a 2-cost quick. You can select enemy follow on field, deal it 3 damage, draw a card, then discard a card. So being able to do this on your opponent's turn is just very good, especially if it's the early turns and you don't manage to hit your Dragon Oracle. You can leave 2 up, and if you have the Force of the Dragonute, you can answer your opponent's turn, draw a card, discard a card, you know, doing everything so you can filter your hand and just dig through your deck a little deeper. Alright, next up we have Dragonclad Blade Master, so he's a 2-cost 2/2. You can engage him and you select enemy follow on field, deal 3 damage, and you can activate only if there are at least 3 Draconic Duelist cards on your field. So this is just a solid way to remove things and then also getting a lightning counter as well. So this next follower isn't going to be too dependable in terms of removal, but it is nice damage if you need it, especially with small followers. So Roy Dragon Cleaver does evolve into a 3/3, but on evolve you select enemy follow on the field and deal it 2 damage. And if it's a Wormkin follower, you deal 5 damage instead. So when you're playing up against the mirror match, I think Roy Dragon Cleaver is just a GOAT, but unfortunately outside of that, if you're not going up against the same type of Dragoncraft deck, you're not going to really enjoy his on-evolve ability. Alright, then lastly we have Gargoyle, so it's a 4 cost 4/5, it has Rush and Ward, but when it comes into play, if there are at least 3 Draconic Duelist cards in your field, you draw 2 cards. Alright, so this card is very good in terms of drawing and then rushing into something, but I personally don't like cards that are Rush and Ward, that don't have like either a big high stat line in terms of like the defense, or a big high stat line in terms of the attack. Because when you swing with this, if you're swinging at a 4/4, you have a 4/1 with Ward, and that's not very hard to remove. So I do want to give an honorable mention to Dragon's Handspur. This isn't necessarily a Draconic Duelist card, but just being able to draw a card and then keeping the card that you managed to see is just nice. But it just does feel kind of bad that this card is a 2 cost. You have to pay 2 to deal 2 to a follower, and then you draw a card on your turn. Kind of would be really manageable if it was a quick, because honestly, let's be real, there's a card that does almost the same thing with, you know, drawing and then discarding a card, which is fine, filtering. But at the same time, you know, we have a card that's like Blazing Breath that you can spend 1 and you deal 4 damage by just having 7 play points. Alright, so let's talk about board wipes. So it is one thing if our opponent's going to be playing cards, but it's really scary when our opponent plays multiple cards in one turn. So we have answers here that are going to be helping us answer our opponent's boards. So the first card you shouldn't honestly recommend, but is something that you can look towards. We have Conflagration, and it's been around since set 1. It's been amazing. You spend 5 and you deal 5 to the board. What can we say? But next up, this card might actually be very useful since it's a 2 cost technically. So we have the 2 cost Unbound Emotion. This card costs 1 more to play for every follower on your field, and you deal 7 damage to each follower on the field. Now this card I highly recommend just because this card can be searched off of Dragon Cleaver, and you know you always need a get out of jail free button, so this will be your good get out of jail free button, getting the 2 cost card that you need, and it's a board wipe. Alright, and next up we have Jurva of Draconic Male, so it's a 5 cost 5/5. When it comes into play, you discard your hand, and at the start of your end phase, deal 5 damage to each other follower on the field, and you draw a card. Alright, let's be honest. We're playing Dragoncraft. We're not going to be known for our hand size. So getting rid of our hand, especially if we only have like 1 or 2 cards, especially if they're not boss monsters, and our opponent built up a board with, you know, 5 defense or lower, this isn't a bad option to look towards, especially since when our opponent's going to be building up a board, there's only one specific deck where you build up an entire board and they don't lose a hand size. Alright, and lastly we have Path to Purgatory. So this is my personal recommendation, and I wouldn't say play Path to Purgatory on 3. No, that is not what I'm saying here. You have to play smart to win. So playing smart really does help out with Path to Purgatory. So if you're at 9 health and your opponent has like a big board, but they have a small hand size, you can really go for Path to Purgatory and not feel bad. So especially dealing 3 and then getting down to 6, which is a little scary, don't get me wrong, and then dealing 6 to their entire board, which will leave your board pretty open. If you do play it in the early turns, it does feel kind of bad though, because you do have the Aftershock token, then you'll have Path to Purgatory. You have to sit there and wait until you get into 6 so you can deal 6 to the board. So if you do the numbers game correctly, I think playing Path to Purgatory very smartly really does help out the deck. Alright, so let's talk about tempo. Alright, so the first card we're going to be looking at is Dragon's Nest. So this is a card that's been around since set 4. This is a solid card to go ahead and put onto the field, and then Remelia is able to get her 3 damage on her evolve. And of course, as the game prolongs and gets later in the game, once you get into Overflow, you're able to draw a card and then give your leader +2 defense. Alright, and then of course, next Marion is just a very good 1-cost follower to be putting into the deck. A nice little goblin that in Overflow will give you another Dragoncraft follower to put into your EX area. And then of course that follower in the EX area can be played too, whatever you choose. Alright, and of course, and lastly, what kind of Dragoncraft deck would we be without Forte? So, Forte actually threatens 9 damage, like she usually does in any other deck that I am very afraid of. So if you're playing Discard Dragon, Forte's good because you'll be threatening 9 damage. And in this deck, Forte's good because you'll be threatening 9 damage if you have at least 5 lightning counters on your Aftershock token. Alright, so here are some hot takey cards, or some cards that are really going to help you out in the deck that people don't really look at, but I think is some little nice tech if you want to be a little different. Alright, so we have Akari Sujino. So this is another card that's going to be helping with ramping. And then also by spending 4, you're just going to be healing 3 too. So if your opponent's going to be swinging at you with low bodies, this just helps in those early turns to recover that health. You know, engage her since he has ward. And then if you manage to play her when you have 10 max play points, you're going to be dealing 3 damage to the leader. Alright, next up we have Garyu. So Garyu's not that bad to be putting in the deck too, just because you're going to be playing a 5-cost Dragoncraft follower on the evolved side. The unevolved draws you a card, so you can replace them out of your hand. And you can just set up a pretty nice board with this card. So playing out the Pure-Hearted Dragoon will go ahead and get you another Draconic Duelist. Their fanfare is going to happen, or they're going to be swinging for Storm. Lightning counters are going to be added to your Aftershock token if everything's set up nicely, and you'll have a pretty big board with Ward. Alright, and the last card here I just wanted to recommend for just to be different while we have Idolmasters out. I think Fumika is not that bad, but she's only good in terms of putting lightning counters on your Aftershock token. Like if you're just shy, if you're like too shy, Fumika is just a good card to play so you can get 2 Draconic Duelist cards out. That being Remelia or, you know, Hypersonic or any 1-cost follower that you might need in your deck. Alright, so let's talk about late game. So one of the things that the deck really does lack, we did see Poseidon as a 8-cost card because that's honestly a late game card, but Poseidon only gets us 2 2-cost followers, which there are 2-cost followers that do have Storm, which is very nice, and you get 3 lightning counters all together with all 3 of them being played, but Poseidon really doesn't do anything outside of playing those 2 cards. But no, we're playing Dragoncraft and we want to swing with big followers very easily. So we spend 6 play points and then I want to spend an extra 3 or an extra 4 if I need to swing with a big 10-10 follower or something like that. That's usually how Dragoncraft works in my mind. So the 2 cards here, Azidahaka being the first one, is a nice card to look at. I think the evolved followers usually is the hard thing about the deck because you need to see almost all your followers that are evolved to really get this to work. But if you manage to get all the followers that you need for the evolved version, I think this is not a bad card to look at. But on the other hand, Zenitra is not that bad as well, so you go ahead and spend 6 to play her because we're not going to be playing the other Zenitra. When she comes into play, you summon a dragon token, draw a card for every Wormkin token on your field, and then while this card is on your field, each Wormkin token on your field has Storm. So spending 6 essentially draws you a card to replace Zenitra. You get a token that's a 5/5 that also has Storm. And then on top of that, you don't get the lightning counters from cards like this, but you can still threaten for at least 7 damage. Alright, so let's get into the tech of the deck. So these are the things that I believe is really helpful against all these matchups going on in set 9. Of course, starting off, we have Angelic Barrage. This just helps out with the Force Bat matchup because those Force Bats are not going to get any stat lines in terms of defense. Alright, so next up, of course, I see Lyriel here, and I know she's expensive in terms of card cost, but I think if you're able to telegraph against Earthright's turn, I think Lyriel's just a nice card to play. I know it's very hard to really answer what Earthright's doing, but if you know Ancient Alchemist is coming, this card really does help you so much. So Lyriel is something to think about when you're going up against Earthright. If you know Earthright is going to be very apparent, Lyriel's not a bad card to just have a 1-of in your deck. So of course, if you don't want to run Lyriel in your deck, Paradise Vanguard is not a bad card to think about too. You're just able to banish a follower that's 4 or less. This gets rid of Riley. This gets rid of Remelia if against your own deck. This really does help out in terms of not letting followers get their last words or being able to come back into the game. And I know, everyone, you see that I have execution in another video. I'm telling you, if you're up against Token Sword and they play Leonidas, if you manage to get that far, which sometimes you do, and they play Leonidas and you have no way to get rid of that Leonidas resolve, you're gonna feel pretty bad that very next turn when they flood that board and you have no way to answer everything. So instead, just use Execution, get rid of it your next turn, or if you're up against the mirror match with Draconic Duelist itself, you can get rid of the Aftershock token, which they have to start all over again. So I think Execution is just a very stable card to be thinking about. Alright, and the last example, I'm sorry, I just really enjoy Execution a whole bunch just because it gets rid of any card on the field in quick timing. If your opponent's going to be swinging at you with Riley and you don't have either Blazing Breath, I think this is just a secondary card that you can use to just go ahead and stop that storm damage from coming at you. Alright soldiers, so we made it all the way to the grade of the deck, and if you know how this goes, we're going to be grading it from a scale to A, or I guess honestly S, but we have no tier 0 decks in Shadowverse Evolve right now, so we'd be grading it from S tier to F tier. And usually we haven't seen an F tier deck yet. We haven't, recorded anything like that. We want to give most of the decks you're probably going to be seeing in the meta. So a grade here is something we're going to be doing. But before we get into the grade of the deck, of course, you know how we do things. Right before we get into the grade, we're going to be looking at an example deck list build that I made myself. It's not going to be super optimal, of course. It's just going to help you get started on what you're going to be needing in the deck. So let's go ahead and move on into that. Alright, so here is my sample for the build. This isn't going to be super optimal, There's nothing really crazy techie that I have in the deck besides the Blazing Breath. I think this card really does help out against the Earthray matchup, especially if they go for Riley. I know I don't have the tech cards in there. I'm not going to put tech cards in the like sample deck list here, but if you know you're going to be not doing well against a certain matchup, I'd say put in the tech cards for that. And, you know, really go on from there. I'd say this is a pretty solid build to start off with. If you need to change anything, feel free to. The deck code is in the description below, but this is a good starting place. Alright, so now getting back into the grade of the deck. I think this is a pretty solid deck. I know there are some hands that are kind of weird, but I think what really kills this deck is that you need to see Romelia. You need to see Romelia turn 3, and if you don't see her turn 4, you're not going to have a good time. And of course, you know, being able to not see your Romelia and then not see your ramp, then you're really not having a good time. Like, your deck really just did not rock with you that day. So I think there are a lot of things that can go wrong with this deck before it can go right. So I do want to give this deck a solid B+. It's very scary to play. I will say the consistency of this deck really does hurt. But if you do see your Romelia, you can start your engine and you can have pretty decent fun with the deck. I've played it, it's been pretty okay. But outside of that, I think it has a pretty decent matchup against Vampires. Is one of the most popular decks this set. Not really sure on the Earthright matchup, but you know, the tech cards I did kind of throw in there to really help out with Earthright, because those big threats from Earthright are something serious. Faust and Riley and all of them. Earthright is just nasty this set, so that's one of the decks you're really going to have to watch out for. But alright, soldiers, who made it all the way to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. Now, for the World's Finals announcements here. So, it seems like it's going to be on the 2nd, which is a Friday, but in the States, it's happening on Thursday. And I know it's going to sound a little ranty here, but honestly, they need to really fix up the website. I use that as a good source of knowledge for products and everything. I'm glad that they do update it, don't get me wrong, because they could do a lot less. But they need to do a little bit better because it is World's Finals, and you know what, I'll actually show you. Alright, so the time is now 5:23 my time, standard Eastern Standard Time, excuse me. It's 4/29/2025, document this. So finals, World's Finals is this week. I'm seeing the booster set 9, and I'm going down to news, and we haven't gotten an update since April 11th for the news. And World's Finals is on Thursday, so I feel like there should be more hype around it. Or at least, you know, on the front page, if we're having World's Finals for Shadowverse Evolve English, someone should definitely know that World's Finals is happening this week for people who don't know and don't check the website like that. So if you get on the Shadowverse Evolve website, of course, there's the other things, you know, the Bushiroad Championship series, but, you know, you have to go into a hyperlink and that takes you to other things, but it doesn't show that World's Finals is happening this week. So I think they do need to do a little bit of improvement on that. Like, I'm very excited for finals. I'm ready for it to happen, but I need them to just do a little bit better in terms of promoting this, because I didn't know until yesterday that it was technically happening on Thursday for us, and I had made plans Thursday, so I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, I'm going to stream the event for you guys. I will definitely be there in terms of attendance of watching, but I can't say I will be, like, you know, spectating and having a, you know, live Comcast for you guys. Unfortunately, I will do a behind the scenes, and I will record when I do get down and do get to sit and watch, but I can't unfortunately watch a live stream of it. Alright, if you don't already know, this is happening on May 2nd, May 1st for anyone that lives in the States like me. So on May 1st, make sure you tune in to YouTube. I'm pretty sure they're going to be streaming on that too, and Twitch as well. So I hope you guys are going to have a fun time. For the people who are traveling to Japan, people who are already there, I'm glad you got there safe. Make sure you're very safe and you follow the rules in Japan, because I'm not 100% on par with everything in Japan there. But make sure you guys follow the rules. And make sure you slow down and think, because I know when you sit down and you get ready for World's Finals, one single misplay can definitely just lose you the entire, you know, entirety of the trip. And you'll just be tilted the whole time, and you're just like, okay, you know, what's the point of me coming if I'm just here and play dumb? But most of the people you are already here already know how their decks are played. They already, like, scoped out everything. Just make sure you slow down, make the right play, and, you know, we will have one champion at the end of the day, honestly. That's what it comes down to. Alrighty, and lastly, make sure you watch your stuff, because I know there are some grubby bandits running around everywhere, all across the globe. So just make sure you watch your stuff, because someone will definitely just scoop it up while you're not looking at it. But alrighty, soldiers, that is the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. I'm very excited for Worlds Finals here. I'm glad you're able to learn the Draconic Duelist deck. Also, I did realize that I spelled Draconic like wrong. I know in the title it's going to be right, but in the video here, I just realized that Draconic was spelled incorrectly in the video, so I now have a cliff note of that now. So if you manage to tell me in the comments below that I spelled Draconic wrong, I'm sorry. But alright guys, make sure you're safe in whatever you do tonight and safe whatever you do for the rest of the year. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.
Yeah. T-R-I-double-N. Just to get you away. What I got to do, what I got to do. Just to get you away. What I got to do, what I got to do. Just to get you away. You pull me too close, now we hesitate. Every single